weekend, people start to grill out. They get the sausages, the hot dogs, the burgers, but maybe not the nothing burger. That's probably something that they want to put on the grill. But, everyone was looking forward to Nvidia's earnings, and they did a pretty good job, Brian, of telling us what we could expect.
Yeah.
But we have to talk about it because it is a $3 trillion valuation company. It has a dramatic effect on the S&P 500, but it seemed like a big old yawn.
It really was. And part of it was, I think, the buildup where we knew that this past week, there wasn't really a lot of new macroeconomic data hitting, but Nvidia was reporting their earnings. And so the media had kind of built up this expectation that their earnings release was going to be more important than any macro data out there. And comes to find out that it really wasn't. It was important. We know that their sales were up. It's like more than 100% year over year. They're continuing to expect very rapid growth with demand for their chips. But their stock fell as a result of maybe a little bit of slowing in spending by their core customers, these so-called hyperscalers, right? They're really dependent on spending by the likes of Microsoft and Google and a few others out there as well.
And let me give a little context because not everybody knows what Nvidia is, but they are a chip maker. And with all of this AI technology, they are the leader, and they're not quite a monopoly, but they are the leader. They spend $10 billion on R&D alone, right? Mm-hmm. So that is really separates them from everybody else. And by the way, what they talked about was their earnings from the old chip. They have this new chip called the Blackwell.
Yeah.
And when that thing comes out, there was going to be a lot of demand. And AI is just in the first inning, if even the first inning at this point. So, folks, this is a stock that is going to get a lot of attention over the number of years.
It is. And one of the concerns that some analysts had was that apparently there were a few little snags as far as the rollout of that Blackwell chip. It looks like it's going to be on time, but maybe a little bit more expensive to produce. And so when I was kind of tracking NVIDIA's stock as they released the earnings numbers and as they were going through the press conference afterwards, it was really around that as far as the outlook, as far as what's the cost associated with building that chip, because the demand for that already looks huge. They're able to set the price pretty much $35 billion per quarter in revenue. So they're spending $10 billion on research and development, but they're really raking it in. Now, even though the stock was down, the rest of the market wasn't, which I think should give some people comfort, knowing that even though big tech was leading the way up, it's not as though they are necessarily going to actually lead the way down.
Yeah, but it could, because they're such an overweight. So I don't want to be. Yes. I want to be careful on that because of the fact that they are such an oversized weight of the capitalization, and those top 7 stocks really represent about a third of the valuation. So we certainly have to watch that. Let's change direction and really talk about the consumer right now seems to be exhausted. There was, as we all know, and we've talked about it, $6 trillion of stimulus that was injected into the economy over the number of years. And so the recipients of that, primarily consumers, were spending that money. And as that liquidity has wound down, the consumer is kind of running out. And you can see GDP is slowing down. So you have GDP slowing down, number one. And number two, we have obviously the BLS, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, number was BS. Mm-hmm. Those two things together are something we have to watch. But to show that the consumer might be slowing down, we're seeing that perhaps the trade down trade is perhaps exhausted.
It could be. We could be at that point where people have readjusted where they're doing their shopping. That does take some time. And one of the things that we heard during earnings season was that people are continuing to trade down. But now it might be at the point where you're almost at this equilibrium where people are like, okay, I'm used to going to, let's say, Walmart instead of Target, or Target instead of Nordstrom. Or one of the big news items this past week was Dollar General. Mm-hmm. They reported, and it was a very disappointing report. Their stock fell the most in their history. It was like, I think the stock price went down more than 30%.
And by the way, it's not $1. I'm sure that someone of your category doesn't go into that store, but they're about $1.25. It's not $1, so that shows inflation is even hitting the dollar store.
That's true. I wonder if there's any lawsuit brewing out there as far as
the $1.25
like
store,
just like the foot-long subs and that. It's not really a foot, right? It's not really $1.
There's a joke in there, but there's also this other thing. My daughter was going to school in London, and when she went to school there, she could get onto Ryanair for something like, honestly, $29 and go to Barcelona.
Yeah.
And so these crazy flights. Well, Ryanair's made some news this past week as well.
They did. The CEO came out and said that he expects that there's going to be continued downward pressure on fares as we go into wintertime. So keep in mind that they are mostly, as you point out, in Europe. So they're not a low-cost carrier in the United States. It'd be interesting if they did bring that business model
It
here.
should be called Brian Air, and you should bring it here instead of Ryanair.
I like that. Yeah, maybe we can look into that. But he said that over in Europe, their growth is a lot slower than ours. Even though our growth is slowing, it's still positive. It's still above what they're experiencing over in Europe. And then also because of higher energy prices over in Europe, people are having to economize, kind of figure out that budget. And he expects that you're going to continue to see downward pressure on airfares over in Europe. Similar thing that we're hearing in the United States from a lot of the air carriers, where they're saying that people are willing to postpone travel, look for the deals. And so that's not something that's going to go away anytime soon.